I'm Huw Thomas, and I'm a partner at Carey Olsen in Jersey. I practice in employment law, privacy and data protection, and what my partners like to call the weird stuff. This is Carey Olsen's podcast, People, Behaviour and Governance, which is a podcast about organisations, the people within them, and how those people behave and occasionally misbehave. Today, we're joined by Toby Clyde-Smith, founder and owner of Tall Tales Tours. I think it's safe to say that Toby's been on something of a professional journey, from rugby to business psychology to organising historically themed walking tours of Jersey. So welcome, Toby.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. So, as I said in the introduction, you've been on quite a journey, sort of rugby to psychology to organisational change to historical tours. Is there any theme that sort of links all of them?
Yes. So if I go back to my rugby days, I think the one thing that I remember is not playing very much. I was I was injured a lot of the time.
Yep.
And at the time, that's a difficult thing to deal with, lots of frustrations. But what it gave me was a window into how teams work.
Okay.
I was almost a spectator to how Jersey were playing at the time, but also most importantly, how to get the rest of the team to gel well.
Yep.
And so that stuck with me. So going into business psychology, that's what business psychology is about. How do people get better at their jobs? How do people get better at working in teams? And the main lesson that I took from rugby was it's a people business. You can learn the skills, you can learn the techniques, you can get better at tackling, you can get better at throwing, mauling, whatever it is. But ultimately, the most change you're going to get is about how do you motivate those individuals more effectively? How do you bring them together more effectively? So that was the link that linked my rugby life and my business psychology life. And then inevitably, I started to think about Jersey, just more broadly, being from Jersey. Whilst I was looking at Jersey with my sort of psychologist hat on, I was seeing that there was a lot that we're not doing as a community that we perhaps could be doing to bring people together, to give people a clearer sense of identity. And I think most fundamentally to really instill a sense of belonging to this island and to this Long Island story that we've got. And over the course of having those thoughts, I realized that our history, our shared story, this island's amazingly extraordinary history, is just something that we haven't explored. That it's there, and Jersey Heritage do a great job of memorializing lots of the different things that have happened here, but really the human stories that sit within our great island story just aren't breaking through into the collective consciousness. And so that led me to want to move towards really trying to fill that gap, explore those stories, and see if I can get people engaged in that, and therein doing make them feel like they belong to this place that we call the Rock.
It's an interesting one. Was there a particular sort of story that sort of inspired you to get into that or to start Tall Tales Tours?
Yeah, so there were two things. There was a moment and then there was a story. So the moment was I went on a tour myself with a guy called Ian Renane, a local historian, great historian of Jersey's military history. And he took us on a tour of St. Brelard's Cemetery, and he pointed across St. Brelard's to La Cotte de la St. Brelard's, that great cave over at the eastern side of the beach. And he told us that more Neanderthal artifacts had been found in that cave than all of the other Neanderthal sites in Britain combined. And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
I was like, what? I had no idea. I'd never been told that fact. I've grown up here. I'd never realised that Jersey was unique in that way. So I thought, well, is Jersey unique in any other way? So I started to look more broadly into the other parts of our history. And again, I just came across stories that I was like, why isn't this known? Why isn't this talked about? So I'll give you the one that really sort of lifted me into this space and made me convinced that I wanted to pursue it. And that, have you ever been to Government House?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're lucky enough, you get the invite once in a blue moon to head there for a dinner. And one such dinner was held by a lieutenant governor called Norcott in 1873, so 1876.
A long time
ago. A while ago.
Yeah.
And it's an August day, it's beautiful weather. And they had a guest of honor. And that guest of honor was a Jersey girl. She was from St. Saviour's, and she'd recently left Jersey, got married, and she'd made a splash in the most extraordinary way in London society, to the point where she was probably the most famous woman in Britain. She was still in her early 20s, and her husband decided to go back and visit Jersey. You know, I'm from Jersey. If I became famous, I'd want to come back. Henry Cavill came
Yeah.
back when he was Superman. You want to go and rub it in to your neighbours a bit.
Fair enough.
So she came back, and she was guest of honour at Government House on this night. Now, there was something slightly different about this night, in that the governor and his wife had two young girls staying with them at Government House on that night. They were daughters of two friends of theirs who lived down St. Saviour's Hill. They were about 12 and 10 years old. And their parents weren't the greatest parents. They used to ditch them, leave them at Government House, and head off travelling. And this was one of those occasions. So the two girls were told, the most famous woman in Britain is coming for dinner tonight. You are not to leave your bedroom. Now, if you tell any two young people that,
Yeah.
they're going to leave their bedroom. And so this lady arrives. She walks in, and she asks immediately, can I just go to the toilet quickly to make sure that my makeup's okay before dinner starts? So she's led into the toilet. She sits down at the dressing table, and she hears some giggling coming from under the dressing table. So she lifts up the muslin, and she sees these two young girls hidden under the dressing table. They had hidden themselves there in the hopes of getting a glimpse of Lily Langtry, the most famous woman in Britain. So the girls, giggling, did this they said, shh, to Lily, don't tell anyone we're here. And Lily gave them a conspiratorial wink, left them there, went to dinner. She hid some food in her bag, and she brought it out to them halfway through the dinner.
Yep.
Now, why that story is extraordinary is because that moment was spoken about in the autobiographies of all three of those ladies, the two girls and Lily Langtry, later on in their lives, because those two girls went on to become two of the most extraordinary women that Jersey's ever produced. So to quickly give you their CVs. So the older sister was someone called Lucy, and their parents tried to educate them with governesses. None of the governesses liked to work with them. They considered the two girls completely uneducable. So they all resigned. And what the parents ended up doing was just leaving these two girls on their own all day in their separate bedrooms. Not the greatest upbringing.
No.
But Lucy spent her that time designing dresses for her dolls, and then eventually designing dresses for her younger sister. And when Lucy got married to a nasty man called James Wallace, she moved over to London, and she realised quite quickly, she got pregnant, had a daughter herself, and realised, I need to make myself financially independent. So she started designing dresses for friends. Those were so extraordinary that the friends told friends. And within 10 years' time, she owned the biggest fashion label in the world, a fashion label called Lucille. She had shops in New York, Chicago, Milan, Paris, London, in Mayfair. She dressed stars of stage, stars of screen. All the best and the brightest wanted to be dressed by Lucy. Lucy divorced this useless husband of hers and married the fantastically named Cosmo Duff Gordon.
Fantastic name.
Absolutely fantastic name. He was a gold medal winning fencer and the heir to a huge port fortune. And so life was going extremely well for them. I think of them as the Jay-Z and Beyonce of their sort of time. Everyone wanted to know them. And then in April 1912, having attended Paris Fashion Week, they went back to Cherbourg and they jumped on the great new liner, the Titanic. To head back to New York. They were first class, and on the evening of the 14th of April, when that iceberg struck, they were having dinner with the richest couple on the boat, John Jacob Astor and his young wife, Madeline, who was pregnant. She was 18 years old. And they jumped on a lifeboat number 4, criminally underfilled, as some of these lifeboats were. And when the staff on board that lifeboat said to them, we need to go back and rescue people from the water, so Cosmo bribed them not to. And so this came out in the inquest. Sir Cosmo said, hold on, I was just giving them some money to so they could get some dry clothes when we got back to land. Don't really believe him. And their marriage broke down. They lost their reputations. And Lucy Duff Gordon, the most famous fashionista in the world, who invented the catwalk, invented professional modeling, lost everything. And she died in poverty in Putney. Her younger sister Eleanor had a more extraordinary life.
More extraordinary life.
More extraordinary life. She spent her time reading, autodidact, read everything she possibly could. She started to write everything down in diaries. She saw her sister get married and become successful. So she got married to a guy called Clayton Glynn. She became Eleanor Glynn. She moved over to London and she started writing novels.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the first versions of erotic fiction.
Good Lord.
If you read them, there's nothing erotic about them. But they were banned.
Quite racy for
They
the
became
day.
they became notorious, and she became this individual that everyone wanted to have round to dinner, but no one would say that she was coming round. So she became extremely successful doing that. But then when World War I hit, she dropped everything, went to the front line and became one of the only female war correspondents reporting from the front line of the First World War. And then she persuaded David Lloyd George, the English Prime Minister, during the peace conference process in 1919 to allow her to come into the signing in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. And she was one of only 2 women present at the signing of Versailles. After that, she went to Hollywood. She was convinced by William Randolph Hearst to go and be a part of the start of Hollywood. She ended up writing 26 screenplays for movies, directing 4 movies, producing 2 more, and she became one of the founders of Hollywood as we know it. She was best mates with Charlie Chaplin, and every awkward embrace that you see in silent cinema, she was behind the camera coaching it. She was an incredible woman who had an extraordinary impact on popular culture. And there would be no 50 Shades of Grey without her.
Fair enough.
So those are 2 sisters to sort of close off the story. Those are 2 sisters born within 2 years of each other. They're from St. Saviour's. They met another St. Saviour's girl who was the most famous woman in the world at the time. And they all went on to change the world. And those are just 3 individuals. And that for me shows me that Jersey is this extraordinary place with an extraordinary heritage of individuals who've gone on to punch well above Jersey's weight. And yet they're not recognized or known. And that's an interesting question for me and one I'm trying to find out.
So there's 2 questions there, isn't it? What is it about Jersey that lends itself to generating these extraordinary people? And why don't we know about them?
I wish I had the answer to both, but I think about both questions a lot. And I think to try and answer the first question, I think we have to look at where Jersey is.
Yeah.
It's wedged up against the neck of Britain's greatest enemy for 800 years, France. France is the elephant, as Napoleon said, and Britain is the whale. And so you've got these great European empires constantly, almost for 800 years, at war with each other. And Jersey is a possession of the British wedged up against the nape of its enemy. So just that positioning pushes Jersey onto to become almost a frontier town. Almost like in the American Midwest, where life was hard. You had to be constantly vigilant. You can see the shore of the enemy if you just look over the sea at the North Coast.
On a clear day.
On a clear day.
Yeah.
Just imagine the nerves. And you know, there's a great fact that Jersey has perhaps the oldest militia in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for a very clear reason. Jersey was a dangerous place.
Yeah.
In places that are dangerous, you create strong personalities. You have to be strong. You have to be tough. So that's one element. The other element is we're surrounded by water with a great tidal range. And shallow reefs and shoals. So it's really hard to get to Jersey. It's easy to defend Jersey, but really hard to get there. So what we have to do as islanders, if we're producing things like Jersey Islanders have hugely over history, we have to take them to the people we want to trade with. So that draws people from Jersey out and into the world trading. And there are records of Jersey fishermen trading on the shores of Iceland in the 13th century. That there is a question mark over who out of all the European settlers who got to Newfoundland first. Is it maybe Jacques Cartier from St Malo? Is it John Cabot from Genoa through Bristol? Or were Jersey fishermen going there first and coming back with those stories? We won't know. But what we do know is Jersey were pioneering in their travel around the world, and you had to be an exceptional sailor to grow up in these waters. So I think when you combine all those things, you instill sort of an adventurous spirit into a community that needs to be extremely tough, dogged, and determined. It's that recipe that creates really interesting people. And then the final point would be genetics. We've got Norman heritage. And what's the Norman heritage? Normandy is Norsemandy. That's a Viking settlement. And what are Vikings? They are explorers. They are seafarers. And they've got an extremely big sort of call to adventure. And so when you combine the genes with the geography and our situation as an island, but just an island, I think all of those things mean that you create some really, really interesting history and really, really interesting people.
Yeah.
Why don't we know it? It's an easier question to answer, I think. And that is that primarily we educate on a national curriculum. And that is so that we can standardize testing and get people into universities in Britain. Completely understandable. But the sacrifice we make is understanding and connection to local history. And I think that's certainly what I see through my tours is all the people from Jersey that I take on tours are surprised by what they're hearing. And most of them haven't come across these people before.
So what's the response been like? Has it been obviously positive because you're doing pretty well, but what's the response been like? Has it been surprise, shock? Is it sort of, have people come back?
Yeah, well, I think, and again, my conception of Jersey growing up was this is a small, safe island that's very well regulated, and nothing much changes here. Nothing interesting happens here. And I think my friendship group, my parents, my colleagues all share a similar conception. If you've grown up here, that's the way you sort of see Jersey.
Quite staid and
Yeah, it is. But if you lift that veil up and look back past the occupation into the 19th century and before, you start to see the island that we've just described, something completely different to that, an island that reinvents itself. And so the people that come on my tours, when they hear this information and hear these amazing stories of people that have come from here and gone on to do extraordinary things, it's shock and surprise. But also, I think the final part of that is a sort of a realizing pride that actually being from Jersey isn't a limiting thing. It's an enabling thing.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about history is it can play an important role in people's sense of identity. Like who I am is I'm a person from Jersey. And what that means is I can go on to achieve anything because people from Ireland have gone on to achieve anything before me. And I think that's a great thing for people to know. And we shouldn't be avoiding talking about that.
And what about sort of story selection? Do you include sort of some of the darker stories about Jersey in the Channel Islands?
Well, I think if Netflix is anything to go by, the darker stories are quite popular, and Jersey is certainly no stranger to darkness. I think what you get with an island that's experienced so much war is you get the good, but you also get the bad of that. In difficult circumstances, people behave in, unfortunately, the same ways across the world. If we go back to the 16th century, we can and the start of the witch trials here. And Jersey being one of the witch trial capitals of Europe per capita, and some of the stories of how we selected these individuals and then what we put them through is disturbing. And we're very lucky that we've got detail. We've got diarists like Jean Chevalier who are sitting in Royal Square watching the witch trials happening and writing about what they're seeing. So this is not something we're inventing. This is something that we can read about and hear the emotion, and I can almost hear the baying chants for blood from the crowds of people that would gather at these witch trials. And so I think the witch trials is one area of darkness. I think another area of darkness, particularly in Jersey, is it's always been quite a lawless place. We didn't get a paid police force until the second half of the 19th century. So before that, we had to deter people from committing crimes, and so we came down brutally on people. People would be put to death for seemingly innocuous crimes nowadays, like theft.
Yeah.
The theft of one watch someone was executed for in 1807. And actually, Jersey's got the strange distinction of being the last place in Britain where someone was publicly hanged. In 1875, a guy called Joseph Lebrun, on only circumstantial evidence, was convicted of killing his sister Nancy, when the only evidence was her husband said he did it.
Oh.
And her husband was there at the time. Her husband's gun was used, and her husband was found covered in blood and having alcohol in his system, whereas poor Joseph Lebrun didn't have any blood on him, had no gunpowder on him, and was sound asleep in his bed when the police found him. And so he was unfortunately the last man to be put to death down in Newgate Street Prison, where the hospital currently is. And it was that case and the fact that he probably might have been innocent that allowed us finally to move away from that. So Jersey has these things where we do things differently at a different pace, and some of them are quite dark, but also they give us a bit of perspective about how lucky we are to live on the safe island we do nowadays, and it contravenes that safe tag a tiny bit.
And I suppose the other one is the occupation and some of the darker stories from that, particularly things like camps in Alderney and things like that. Do you think those are important to talk about?
I think that history, and I think one of the things, so if you look at the Rest is History podcast, so popular, I think they get about 15 million downloads every month. I mean, it's extraordinary success. And they talk about history like you wouldn't have heard it at school. At school, you get told there is an answer, and this is what we want the answer to be. We want you to write about the causes, the consequences, the facts, the timeline. But actually, history isn't any of those things. History is messy. It's complex. It's complicated. There's darkness, there's light, there's evil, there's good. And the fascinating thing about exploring some of the characters from our past is that you will find out that they have capacity for both good and evil. So one great example of that. So Westmount was called Gallows Hill in the past. It's where we used to put people to death. And the last person to be put to death there was a guy called Philippe Jolin, St Helier boy who joined the Navy and grew up with a very, very abusive father. Used to beat him a lot. So he ran away and joined the Navy at 14. But he was back in Jersey at the age of 21. And a boat hit the rocks in the storm, just out on the rocks near where Elizabeth Castle is. And he very bravely got in a tiny boat and went out and rescued people from those rocks, risking his own life. So a total hero. Mm-hmm. Within 3 years, he killed his own father, and he was put to death for that, despite the fact that his father was a very disturbed individual himself. So just in that story alone, you get to see that people have capacity for great good and also great evil, and that's what history is. It's complicated, and it's messy, and it's fascinating.
So in recent years, we've seen a lot of social media and online commentary, and you mentioned the rest is history, but we've also got things like right-wing and left-wing influencers sort of seeking to use history to advance sort of ideology and things like that. Do you find that affects public understanding of the past? Do you see that at all? Or
I absolutely see that. I think there was a recent example in relation to, did Winston Churchill Is he really responsible for World War II and what happened there?
An interesting one.
And you had Tucker Carlson and people platforming individuals who said they were historians but really didn't have the credibility to
Yeah.
back that up. And you can absolutely see people being sold by those stories, because ultimately controversial information spreads much more quickly
Yeah.
than well thought out, balanced and rational argument. But then you've got two options, is to either make sure that those people aren't platformed,
Mhm.
or to ensure that, and you saw this subsequently to the individual I'm talking about being platformed, you get a group of very credible historians giving the counter argument to that
Yeah.
and saying why it's wrong. And I think that's history. It is presenting arguments and tearing those arguments down, coming up with another argument. And I think most people love the debate.
Yeah.
They don't really want to know what's right and what's wrong. They love to see that these things can be debated. And I think it's in the process of being debated that you start to realize what good history looks like compared to what bad history looks like. So it's a difficult subject, but I think we should always listen to all views, knowing that if you get something wrong, you're going to get some of the great authors coming down on you pretty hard, and that's not a place you want to be in.
Yeah. I suppose that's the interesting outcome of the Tucker Carlson interview, wasn't it? That it did generate an awful lot of backlash, an awful lot of sort of very well informed backlash, which I think is quite reassuring.
It is.
But I mean, you mentioned the sort of the occupation, and people perhaps since the occupation viewing sort of Jersey as a very safe place. Do you think the occupation changed us as a society? Made it more British? Made it more
Well, I think,
staid? Willing to forget? I don't know.
yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are definite. I mean, talking about the dark history of Jersey, I think the occupation had some consequences for certain families, the families that were seen to be more sympathetic to the occupiers, who after the occupation were excluded, and the Paynells were one of those
Mm.
families. And I think anyone in Jersey knows the story of Edward Paynell and his father, who was seen as a collaborator, and they were massively excluded. And it's not to justify any of his actions based on that,
Mm.
but there were definite actions taken and consequences of things like that. I think for me, though, talking about the move towards Britishness, I think that started in around the year 1800.
Interesting.
And if we walk around St Helier,
Yeah.
you'll notice that most of the street names have a British name, usually taken from somewhere in London, like Bond Street, for example.
Yeah.
And then the French name, the historic name for that street, Rue de la Madeleine, which is, Madeleine was the ancient Norman chapel on that street. So that movement started in around the year 1800, when more and more British people started to move here, particularly to St Helier, and started to rename things, and started this very slow move to pushing out Gerrier as a language to ensure that only English is being taught in schools, and bringing much more English law into our courts, and slowly becoming culturally more British. Now, I think coming to the occupation, obviously 140 years later, it's quite interesting to see that Britishness that had really took hold by that point didn't help us at the time. And what we actually relied on is local defiance, local spirit to keep going. And I think, again, that defiant spirit is something that you could see very strongly in Jersey 140 years before the occupation. And I think what I've seen is that from the year 1794 for the next 100 years, you had a sizable wave of immigration into the island, running away from the French Revolution, the bloody revolution. People coming from Europe and from France, fleeing revolutions in their own countries, and looking for a bilingual island that wasn't Britain and wasn't Europe that they could take solace in and find sanctuary in. And this is another story I think that we forget in Jersey. Is Jersey was a refuge for political refugees from around Europe, and those people, wherever they were from, came here and found that they could be themselves, they could express their ideas, and they could stay, and they were welcomed. So famously, René Francois Chateaubriand, who came here in the 1790s, he was only here for 4 months, nursing back from ill health. He called it the Island of Friends. And all of those people had an effect on the culture, I believe, because they came here with free thinking, independent thoughts and ideas of defiance, and not saying yes blindly to authority. And I think it's those ideas that took root, and eventually by the occupation, we saw the outcomes, which is people saying, no, I'm not going to. Like the great story is Clifford Cohu, the canon of St. Saviour's Church, who ended up on the first Sunday of the occupation delivering a sermon from Psalm 94, which I'm paraphrasing was "Be gone, you evil oppressors," to a partly German congregation.
That's quite punchy in the context of the Nazis.
That's punchy. But that was the Jersey spirit coming through that had been imbued over about a century. And so, yeah, I don't see the occupation as a massive turning point. I see it as the culmination of a slow journey from the year about 1800 onwards.
And what about language? Because we don't really have a French dialect anymore, do we? I mean, it's there, but it's on life support, I suppose you'd suggest. I mean, is there a way back for Charriers?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I would ask the same question about French, because this island had a huge amount of French speakers as well as the local patois area. And again, from the year 1800s onwards, those were sort of pushed out by the British settlers. Now, my question is we've got Jeria, and that's a huge part of our heritage that we need to look at, explore, conserve, preserve. Absolutely. But I've got some questions around French itself, and what's our relationship with that? Because some of the great things that happened to Jersey in the 19th century are drives into becoming one of the trading hubs for cod, for example. By the year 1865, we were producing about 6% of the wooden ships made in Britain. In that year, we were producing oysters. We had an extraordinarily vibrant economy at that point, and most of those industries relied upon our populace being bilingual, French and English. It gave us extraordinary advantages in the trading world. And unfortunately, when we lose Jeria, when we lose French, we lose that competitive advantage. And I think there's a very real need for Jersey to look at that and go, actually, you know what? That was a huge advantage. Geographically, we're next to France, but we are slightly British. And should we be mandating French throughout all of schooling? What will that do for our children and for our future? And I think the great thing about history is you look back and you see that these things played extraordinary roles in the island journey. So I think, it's absolutely a question we should be asking ourselves.
Cool. So finally, quick fire. Do you have a favourite Jersey historical figure?
Well, I think the one that any historian would say would be Philippe Dauvan. And I think if there's one man, born in 1754, down on the high street, he's got his plaque there. He became within a whisker of becoming royalty. And if anyone listening hasn't heard his story, go and read it. It will blow your mind. And I cannot understand why a Hollywood movie hasn't been made about his life. So I'd have to say that I can't go anywhere else than go to Philippe as that one character.
We'll have to do that one next time.
Yeah.
So that's all we've got time for. Thank you, Toby, for coming in. It's been really good and certainly quite educational. There's a lot there I didn't know. So that's all we've got time for. If you'd like to speak to us about anything that's come up today, please do get in touch. If you'd like to go on a Tall Tales tour, you can find them on Instagram or Facebook. And that's all we've got time for. So we'll see you next time.